My name is Dr. Stefan Mokrahysky. I'm a general pediatrician in a large pediatric clinic. I'm also one of the faculty for this campus-wide ethics course. Let me tell you about a case of mine. Some of the details have been changed to preserve confidentiality. I was seeing a new patient, JT, in my office for a routine sports physical. The family just transferred their care to my clinic during the last open enrollment. JT is a healthy 15-year-old. Our pediatric practice is very concerned about prevention, and we initiated a questionnaire to screen for adolescent risk factors. It's given to all our adolescent patients once a year. One of the questions is, have you ridden in a car with someone who has been drinking or using drugs? When I was about to enter the exam room, Deb, the nurse working with me that day, drew my attention to the fact that JT had answered that question, yes. During the course of my conversation with JT, he clarified his response, explaining that his dad has several DUI arrests and is on probation. The family car has a breathalyzer attachment which prevents the car from starting if alcohol is detected on the breath. JT has his learner's permit and is learning to drive. By his report, he starts the car after breathing into the analyzer. Several times his dad has been drinking and has had JT start the car, and then the dad drives. Sometimes JT is in the car, never anyone else. JT was visibly upset relaying the story and asked me not to tell his mom, who had come with him and was in the waiting room.
I'm Bernie Karshmer, professor at the School of Dental Medicine and faculty in the campus-wide ethics course. Even though Dr. Mokrahysky had to figure out what to do in real time, let's pause the story to carefully consider the ethical issues and demonstrate how you can apply the 8-step process to this actual case.
JT's situation certainly has ethical implications. I was thinking, should I honor JT's request to keep this confidential, or should I deal with the potential harms by reporting this to someone? If so, who should I tell? I think this is a case of child abuse or neglect. I think I do have to report it, but how? Where should I start? With JT? With Mom in the waiting room? My gut reaction was to honor his request for confidentiality, talk to him about the potential harms, and trust him not to do this again. But then I thought, this is my schedule talking. I don't really have time to get into this. But the more I thought about it, the more concerned I became. There could be real harms if this continued. How could I live with myself if they got into an accident? After all, isn't that why we initiated the questionnaire in the first place? To be proactive in dealing with risks. I think this is child abuse and neglect, but how should I go about reporting it?
In every kind of careful decision-making, we should start with the facts, and particularly in ethical decision-making, when different parties can disagree about appropriate actions, sometimes the conflict can be resolved simply by clarifying the facts. What do we know from Dr. Mokrahysky's story? JT is a 15-year-old minor who depends on his parents to give consent for most types of care and to pay for the care. JT is healthy and is in the office for a routine sports physical. JT has told you that he sometimes blows into the breathalyzer to start the car when his dad has been drinking, and then his dad drives. His dad is on probation from the courts after several DUI arrests. JT's mom is in the waiting room, but JT has asked you not to tell her.
What facts do I need to gather to help me analyze my obligations? What does our questionnaire say about confidentiality? Did JT and his family receive any information about the limits of confidentiality? Does JT have capacity to be making decisions about his health care? Does JT's mother already know about this, or is she suspicious? Why did JT include the information on the questionnaire? Does he want help? Is JT's father ever violent when he's drunk? Does JT feel that he, his mother, or sister are physically in danger from their father? How often does his father ask him to do this? Is his father getting treatment for his alcohol use? If so, where? Does his father have a caseworker that could help? Is there a child abuse neglect reporting requirement?
There are two very real temptations when dealing with the facts. The first is to assume that you can't really analyze this case because all the facts are not known. But that's not necessarily true. You can clarify which facts are most important and why. Make assumptions and test how a change in facts would affect your final decision and its justification. The second temptation is to rest the entire analysis of this case on the final question about legal obligations. But there's a difference between ethics and law.
I'm Annie Harrington. I'm an attorney in Denver with a master's degree in bioethics, and I serve on the ethics committee at the Children's Hospital Colorado and also as a small group facilitator in this ethics course. I have been asked to comment on the legal issues in this case. It is very important to be aware of what the law says, if anything, about a particular situation. But don't confuse ethics and the law by letting concern for the law completely overshadow your evaluation of your ethical obligations. People tend to think that there is a big book of laws out there that, if you read it, will clearly tell you exactly what you have to do, or more importantly, not do. Yes, there are certainly laws established by Congress and state legislatures, and regulations by various state and federal agencies. But even these laws require interpretation. In fact, much of our law in the United States is called common law, meaning law that is developed in decisions by judges that are based on legal principles and precedent of courts and other tribunals, as opposed to statutes that are adopted through the legislative process or regulations issued by state or federal agencies. In this case, there is a Colorado state statute that relates to obligations to report abuse and neglect. Title 19 of the Colorado Revised Statutes defines child abuse or neglect as an act or omission that threatens the health or welfare of a child. The statute outlines several categories of harms, including physical harms, unlawful sexual behavior, emotional abuse, use of controlled substances around the child, and, quote, any case in which a child is in need of services because the child's parents, legal guardian, or custodian fails to take the same actions to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision that a prudent parent would take, end quote. As you can tell, the statute contains a very broad definition of what constitutes abuse and neglect. And because the definition is not clear-cut, it is subject to a judicial interpretation. Title 19 also describes the people who are required by law to report child abuse and neglect to a county department or local law enforcement agency. All healthcare professionals are such mandatory reporters.
I'm Des Runyon. I'm a pediatrician with a master's degree and a doctorate in public health, and I also serve as the executive director of the Kemp Center for the Prevention and Treatment of Child Abuse and Neglect. I also serve as a small group facilitator in this ethics course. I've spent my career researching and teaching about how to prevent child abuse and how to help children recover not only from physical abuse, but from what the abuse does to their mental health. I'm glad we're beginning this course with a case that raises awareness about the legal and ethical issues. I'm sorry to say that there are a few too many healthcare professionals who fail to report suspected child abuse and neglect. It's important to realize that the law depends on professional judgment informed not only by knowledge of legal obligations, but also knowledge of ethical obligations. I think Dr. Mokrzycki has both a legal and an ethical obligation to report this case to the appropriate authorities. You don't have to be certain that abuse or neglect has occurred. You have to exercise reasonable judgment about your suspicions. I also think that some of the most important ethical issues come when you consider just how you're going to proceed. You need to consider how your reporting will respect JT and his family, as well as minimizing the risks of harm, both to JT and the rest of his family.
The law does have a strong interest in protecting vulnerable citizens, including children. Guided by the ethical principle of non-maleficence, meaning do no harm, some lawyers, including me and Don Bross, the lawyer with the Child Protection Team at Children's Hospital Colorado, would support Dr. Runyon in advising healthcare professionals that they should report this case. The father's actions could be considered abuse and neglect in that JT is exposed to risks when his father drives him while impaired. JT's health and welfare are jeopardized, and this is not the level of supervision of a prudent parent. Casey Frank, another attorney with a master's degree in public health, who is also a small group facilitator in this ethics course, raises additional legal concerns about the criminal behavior of the father in subverting the workings of the breathalyzer and in violating the conditions of his probation. Statistics show that alcohol in automobiles kill 40% more people than do firearms in homicides. Subverting the workings of the breathalyzer is a Class 1 misdemeanor. Colorado has a crime reporting law that is usually compulsory. The law states that it is the duty of every corporation or person who has reasonable grounds to believe that a crime has been committed to report promptly the suspected crime to law enforcement authorities. However, there are a number of exceptions to this requirement, including an exception in Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 18.8.115, stating that disclosure is not required of any communications that are privileged by law. Casey further states that to his knowledge, no one has ever been prosecuted for failing to report a crime. So, Dr. Mokrahysky may not have a requirement to report the father's criminal behavior. The state has to balance the importance of having healthcare professionals report all kinds of crime with the importance of maintaining confidentiality in the professional-patient relationship. Nevertheless, Casey does raise concerns about the criminal liability of the father and perhaps the reporting requirements of JT. What should Dr. Mokrahysky do, if anything, about this additional reporting requirement?
One of the most important values in healthcare is preventing harm. I have a duty to prevent the harms associated with underage drinking and driving, or riding in a car with a drunk driver. I also have an obligation to the general public to prevent the harms associated with drunk driving. Does this duty of non-maleficence mean that I tell the truth to the parents as well as to the authorities? But I also have an obligation to respect my patients. To me, that means that I educate my patients and respect their judgments about their health. That way I can empower them to be actively involved. Respect also means that I keep their trust by keeping things confidential. If I couldn't treat my adolescent patients confidentially, they would never tell me important things that allow me to help them. And helping my patients, beneficence, is probably the single most important value to me as a physician.
The heart of ethical analysis is the articulation of the values involved for each of the stakeholders. And these values don't necessarily have to be explicitly expressed by the individuals involved. They can be values belonging to the different health professionals as found in the codes of ethics, or values observed from the point of view of the person doing the analysis, or perhaps the values described in our readings. What are the values at stake in this case?
I also have obligations to my colleagues to respect their concerns and values. From the look that Deb gave me, I know that she's concerned as well. I should discuss this with her, since she's an important member of the healthcare team and has information and ideas to help make the best decision for JT and his family.
As a nurse, I have obligations to help my patients and keep them from harm if possible. I see too many of our adolescent patients end up with serious injuries or dead from risky behaviors like riding with drivers who are drunk or driving when they have been drinking. I feel strongly about preventing injuries, not just treating them when they happen. I was on the team that developed the adolescent screening tool that our clinic uses.
I know that I'm only 15, but I understand the things that Dr. Mokrahysky has been telling me. I don't know why exactly I answered the questionnaire the way I did. I guess I'm just sick of dealing with this and I could use some help. I think my mom suspects that this is happening, but she's at the end of her rope with Dad's drinking too. I wish my dad would just stop drinking. But I'm also scared of what might happen if Dr. Mokrahysky tells my mom today. Can he help without letting on that I'm the one who told on my dad? I'm scared when I drive with him, and I'm scared that if I stop doing this, Dad will ask Alice, and she's just a kid. Maybe it was a big mistake to tell the truth in the questionnaire, but I'm not a liar. I feel responsible to take care of my family, but this is getting to be more than I can handle alone. I hope that I can trust the doctor and the nurse to help without making things worse.
What about the values associated with JT's mother, his father, and the public? How are we to understand their perspectives as key stakeholders? Both the mother and the father, as parents, have a key role in caring for their children, helping them get the proper health care, and keeping them from harm. They share an interest in maintaining familiar relationships. The healthcare team has obligations to respect the family as decision makers and to promote familiar relationships. From this perspective, the mother might need to know the truth about the situation. JT's father has a very serious illness, alcoholism, that keeps him from fulfilling this obligation to prevent harm. The team also has obligations of beneficence to try to get him some help. Family members also share this responsibility.
The public is also a stakeholder, wanting to promote safety on the roads and keep people from the harms of drunk driving. There are also interests in promoting family relationships while acknowledging that some families are abusive and neglectful and that vulnerable children should not be subjected to abuse and neglect. So what is the main value conflict in this case? The healthcare team has a duty to report child abuse and neglect to the authorities based on obligations of beneficence and non-maleficence. But they should do this in a way that maximizes respect for JT and encourages his trust and tries to reduce the risks of harm that he perceives.
Step 5 is to consider what options are available. We are trying to find a plan that would respect JT, keep him from harm by addressing the drinking problem, maintain and nurture this family, and keep others from harm. We need to think creatively and thoroughly. There are levels of intervention based on timing, on the cooperation of JT and his mother, and on the team's obligation to report neglect and abuse.
Because this patient is in danger and wants some type of help, you have to do something. And based on the expertise of the lawyers and Dr. Runyon, we think you have to report this case of child abuse and neglect. But how should you proceed? There are 5 choices. First, just call social services and report without telling anyone. Second, tell JT and his mother that you are going to report, and then report. Third, tell JT you are going to report, and not his mother, and then report. Fourth, tell his mother you are going to report and not JT, and then report. Fifth, tell JT, his mother, and his father, and then report.
How could you justify your choice? Step 7 is the most important step and probably the hardest. This is the step that benefits most from the dialogue among different healthcare professionals. The dialogue really mimics what happens in daily clinical life. You work with others on the team to brainstorm and solve not only clinical issues, but the ethical issues that arise in clinical decision making. We all agree that doing nothing is not appropriate. JT, his family, and others on the road are in harm's way. The values of non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice require some type of action. Even though respecting confidentiality is very important, it is not unqualified. If the harms are significant enough, we need to override our concerns for confidentiality to seek help. But how we override confidentiality is ethically important too.
My first step is to discuss this with JT and try to get his cooperation to talk with his mother at this time. This is the most justifiable way to respect JT and also do something to get him some help.
I agree that we should seek JT's input, but I believe that we need to act even without JT's cooperation. We should at least talk to his mom. It would be difficult to live with myself if something happened, and we knew and we could have tried to prevent it. Being proactive is the entire reason for the screen in the first place. We need to use this information.
I think we agree that it's important to start with JT and let him know that we have to report and we have to include his mother. Then talk with JT and his mother together to discuss reporting. Some healthcare professionals even report in the presence of the family with their cooperation. This could improve trust if the family thinks that you are aligning with them. Depending on how the conversation goes with JT and his mother, it's probably unwise to insist on telling the father before reporting.
I'm worried about what will happen to this family. As pediatric practitioners, we have to be family-centered and help them get the resources that they need. I'm worried about the harms that follow from accusing them of abuse and neglect. We have to do this in a way that promotes their trust. This is going to be challenging, but I agree that's what we have to do. I also agree that we shouldn't involve the father in the reporting.
This healthcare team is in agreement that the principles of beneficence and non-maleficence require them to report. They also are in agreement that they will start with JT and then his mother to try to get their cooperation to report. This is supported by the principle of respect. But even without their cooperation, they will report. They do not intend to involve the father in reporting at this point, but some information from the conversation with JT and his mother might reveal that this would be important to do if it enhances trust and the likelihood that the father will get the help that he needs. A possible counterargument could be that the healthcare team should just report without telling JT, his mother, or his father. You may feel that the county social services agency is more experienced in managing this situation, but reporting directly would almost certainly violate the trust that JT and his family deserve. The family will be more likely to regard the team as caring about their welfare and willing to walk with them on this difficult journey. One possible suggestion would be to call social services before you report to get their input on how to handle this before you initiate conversations with JT and his mother. This way, you would get the benefits of their expertise before you handle the situation within the professional-patient-family relationship.
In the spirit of being proactive, in Step 8, we consider whether this ethical issue could have been prevented. One possible change would be to include some information about the circumstances in which confidentiality cannot be maintained. For instance, if you are going to harm yourself or someone else. Another concern is that this disclaimer might scare adolescents away from disclosing information. Perhaps having this discussion with your adolescent patients is the best way to build trust, and assure them that you will work with them when questions arise.
One final consideration for this interdisciplinary course. This example case involves a physician and a nurse. It could have involved any type of healthcare professional. If you were to encounter a similar case, how would this issue of confidentiality versus preventing harm play out in your practice? You could be told information by your patient who also asks you not to tell anyone else. Hopefully this ethical decision-making process will assist you in taking well-thought-out actions as you encounter ethical issues in your day-to-day practice.